The air in the subterranean research annex is not merely cool, it is inert. It holds the scent of industrial-grade climate control, a dry, chemical-tinged, neutral atmosphere designed not for human comfort, but for the preservation of paper fiber and ink pigments against the inevitable decay of centuries. Sound is muffled here, absorbed by the massive density of the surrounding concrete structure and the sheer volume of stored history.
The dominant sound is the high, steady thrum of ventilation systems, a constant drone that masks the frantic scratching of researchers' pens and the soft,
respectful turning of cages. This is the domain of national memory, secured within vaults that look less like libraries and more like the defensive bunkers of a previous age. Here, in the designated reading rooms reserved for sensitive material, the history is not just read, it is physically encountered. The documents delivered to the heavy oak tables are often encased in protective mylar sleeves or presented in archival boxes with stiff, brittle corners. Researchers wear gloves, their movements slow and deliberate, treating each folder as an artifact of immense, perhaps dangerous, weight. For decades, these records existed entirely in shadow, marked by stamps of ascending levels of classification: confidential, secret, top secret, and the elusive, rarely seen classification that simply denoted need-to-know access for information that could irrevocably alter the geopolitical landscape. Declassification, the public act of unveiling, is supposed to be the final chapter in the life of a secret. It is the promised shedding of decades-long shadows, the ultimate delivery of governmental transparency. But often, the promise is incomplete. The delivered product is designed not just to reveal, but shrewdly to obscure. There is a fundamental difference between a document laced with meticulous black-line redactions, the heavy, permanent marker strokes of the censor's hand, leaving behind visible rectangles of obfuscation, and a document that has suffered a surgical removal. Redaction leaves the skeleton of the sentence intact, allowing the reader to observe where the secret resides. Absence, however, is a void. It is a physical nullification, a chronological chasm that renders the historical narrative itself fragmented. It is a calculated act of historical erasure, where entire sequences of vital pages are missing, leaving behind only the ghosts of context. We turn our attention to 5 such instances, documents consequential in their nature, ranging across the expanse of modern national security concerns, which arrived in the public domain conspicuously gutted. These are not instances of accidental loss. They are physical voids meticulously excised from the brittle bindings of official folders. The absence is forensic, leaving trails of glue, tiny tears in the binding thread, and page numbers that jump with alarming discontinuity. The first document we examine is rooted firmly in the paranoia and calculated risk of the Cold War era, the Post-Incident Intelligence Evaluation Report. Let us call it, for reference, the Strategic Intent Assessment, Series 9. The physical folder housing this report is thick, utilizing an older, robust cardstock dyed a faded institutional blue-gray. The original classification, stamped repeatedly in faded crimson ink across the front and internal pages, shouts its former importance. This particular assessment was compiled immediately following a major international proxy crisis, a period when misinterpretation could have resulted in catastrophic escalation. The surviving document details the known actions of the opposing power, their observable military movements, and a comprehensive analysis of their logistical capabilities. This introductory section is densely populated with satellite photography analysis, decrypted communication summaries, and long, detailed summaries of foreign policy shifts. The narrative builds to a crescendo, culminating in a section titled Projected Path and Strategic Intent, Assessment of Future Posture. Logically, this section should be the crux of the report, the moment where raw data transitions into high-stakes prediction and potential response recommendations. The chronological chasm occurs precisely here. The preceding page, page 36, ends with a meticulous breakdown of known resource allocation, concluding the sentence with a dangling fragment. Therefore, based upon the observed patterns of heavy fortification and the sudden withdrawal of non-essential personnel from Sector Gamma, the analysts project the intention is. The following page, clearly numbered in the upper right corner, is page 51.
14 pages, the entirety of the critical analysis, the assessment of intent, and likely the proposed immediate response options have been meticulously removed.
The physical evidence of this removal is unmistakable. Along the spine of the surviving report, where the staple or binding glue once held the excised leaves, the paper is slightly distorted. Tiny, almost microscopic remnants of the missing page's fibers cling to the edge of page 36 and the leading edge of page 51. A faint, papery dust trail marking the path of the censor's blade. The surviving text on page 51 opens abruptly, mid-discussion of countermeasures, referring immediately to a concept or scenario introduced on the missing pages. Contingency Protocol Delta 9 must be enacted immediately following the confirmation of the scenario outlined in the preceding section. The historical void created by this gap is profound. Researchers are left only with the reaction, the implementation of Contingency Protocol Delta 9, without any knowledge of the reason for that reaction. What projection was deemed so sensitive? Was it a projection of imminent attack, or perhaps a projection of weakness and collapse? That would reveal far too much about the monitoring nation's own intelligence capabilities and vulnerabilities. The missing pages are bureaucratic ghosts, forcing historians to reconstruct the motivations of a superpower based solely on circumstantial evidence, forever lacking the direct judgment provided by the government's own experts at the time. The absence defines the interpretation. The second document shifts focus from international maneuvering to the complex, often opaque world of high-value government procurement. Specifically, the documentation related to a massive technological project. We examine the folder detailing the acquisition and development of an advanced multispectral surveillance platform, codenamed Project Chimera. This dossier is presented in a modern, heavy-duty manila folder, perhaps dating from the late 1990s. The paper inside printed on slick, high-quality, heavily acid-free stock, signifying a major budgetary commitment. The document is hundreds of pages long, detailing the engineering specifications, performance milestones, and contractual obligations. The text is dense with technical jargon and acronyms, yet the early sections clearly articulate the need for the platform, the desired capabilities, and the initial projections for cost and delivery timeline. The project's complexity suggests costs running deep into the billions, spread across multiple fiscal years and involving several prime contractors. As the report transitions from technical feasibility to implementation, it requires the necessary supporting documentation, the financial annexes. The surviving text repeatedly references these materials. Page 112 discusses the rationale for non-competitive bidding as detailed in Exhibit B, while page 113 notes the required oversight waivers outlined in Appendix C, Section 4. The entire section designated for these financial and ethical appendices is gone. The report skips from the final technical summary, page 134, directly to the Executive Summary of Findings, page 201. The intervening 66 pages, a gaping physical void, represent the precise paper trail of how public funds were allocated, how potential ethical conflicts were resolved, and how initial cost estimates morphed into final expenditures. In the physical space of the folder, the heavy binding clip is visibly loose in this section. If one slides a gloved finger along the spine, the thickness of the paper stock abruptly decreases. indicating the removal of dozens of pages of heavier bond paper, often used for financial spreadsheets and legal exhibits. The absence here is intensely forensic.
It is a calculated move to prevent scrutiny of money flows.
What was contained in those pages? Were there enormous, unexplained cost overruns?
Did the annexes detail contracts given to politically connected entities?
Did they outline the specific financial mechanisms? Perhaps foreign shell companies or highly complex, layered transactions? Used to fund components of the platform that were themselves too sensitive to mention in the main body of the report? The missing financial annexes create a historical puzzle centered on accountability. The public knows the technological capabilities of Project Chimera and the eventual outcome of its deployment. But they are denied the knowledge of its true cost, both fiscal and political. The vacuum where the monetary details should reside guarantees that the true internal cost-benefit analysis, the bureaucratic justification for spending massive sums on a potentially controversial system, remains permanently hidden. The slick, expensive paper of the surrounding report serves only to highlight the stark emptiness where the numbers used to be. Our third case study delves into the realm of internal governmental oversight and the legal frameworks governing actions generally considered outside the traditional boundaries of law enforcement. The Covert Surveillance Protocol Manual. This document, likely compiled during a period of heightened domestic threat assessment, is less about external enemies and more about internal control. The manual is physically smaller than the previous documents, bound with a simple coil spine, suggesting it was intended for routine internal distribution among a limited number of operational personnel. The paper quality is standard office stock, slightly yellowed with age, its texture smooth and utilitarian. The classification level is complex, often stamped with multiple overlaid classification markings, indicating compartmentalized access. The surviving document is rich with philosophical and legal justification. Pages 1 through 37 meticulously detail the constitutional and statutory authorities invoked to authorize covert surveillance operations. They describe the high bar for securing judicial review, the necessary layers of internal approvals, and the general ethical constraints placed upon agents conducting monitoring. The tone is legalistic, measured, and designed to establish a sense of rigorous governmental control. The physical void in this manual is stark and undeniably deliberate. The document jumps from page 37 directly to page 51. The missing 14 pages leave a yawning, undeniable hole, precisely where the abstract principles should transition into operational reality. Page 37 concludes by defining the threshold for actionable intelligence gathering, promising a delineation of permitted techniques. Once the necessary evidentiary threshold is met, operational teams are authorized to deploy the following technical and human assets for sustained monitoring, specifically including protocols for. Page 51 picks up the narrative with the heading Post-Acquisition Data Management, detailing how collected data is logged, stored, and eventually destroyed. The protocols themselves, the actual mechanics, the specific tools, the triggers for remote activation, the precise geographical limitations or lack thereof. The organizational heart has been violently torn out. All connections now lead only to a jagged, gaping void. The weight of codified doctrine casts a shadow over the glossy promise of the why, highlighting the stark divide between overwhelming ideology and simple justification. The gray regulations stretched into an opaque horizon, designed not for clarity, but for complete bureaucratic exhaustion. The raw complexity of the data mocked him. The solution was not in the manual, but somewhere far beyond his current reach. The schematic for the unseen. This is the blueprint for total sensory superiority. The promise of freedom is etched in this weathered text, but the ubiquitous lens of surveillance is mirrored on every page. Under the veil of dusk, These silhouettes move with urgent purpose. They're signs demanding the defense of constitutional rights and privacy from the state. Scars of a rough extraction. The binder holes betray the page's violent removal, illuminated by dust motes dancing in the sharp light. The contract is binding, but the future is an absolute void. The critical clue was only a fragment, fading into a line of dots that led nowhere. As the sun died over the tract homes, the silent sentinel began its slow rotation. Covert operation status. Online. The tracks are clear evidence of the process initiated, yet they dissolve abruptly into the plains, marking the precise point where the operational sequence failed to conclude. The fourth document brings us closer to immediate, visceral human experience, focusing on the governmental aftermath of a systemic failure, the post-mortem crisis review. The foundations crumbled in smoke and steel, but the silent, fatal collapse happened in the wires. The mandate had failed. In the isolating darkness, the full burden of accountability settled heavily upon the official. The cheap industrial vinyl hid the urgent truth, resting briefly on the polished mahogany desk. The full scope of the investigation is laid bare. Thousands of lines of dense, uncompromising data. Processing this volume feels like drowning in an ocean of timestamps and coded references. The organizational chart reveals bureaucratic chaos, a roadmap of crossed wires and communication paths deliberately leading to nowhere. Static electricity hissed against the cracked display. The operative code was dead, leaving only the ominous, sickly glow of a catastrophic system failure. Following the graphic timeline, we trace the sequence of critical failure points. The stark red markers illuminate precisely where the path fundamentally deviated. The red X seals the fate of the senior partners. The executive pyramid visibly shatters under the immediate impact of turnover. The dense text confirmed their deepest suspicion. The critical juncture was marked by systemic failure at the perimeter. The breach was total. In the cold, dark wreckage of the server room, the critical data assets were declared permanently lost. Page 214 ends mid-sentence. The rest of the directive is violently severed by the abrupt black darkness of the dash. The simple dash drawn on the page ended abruptly here, transforming into the sheer, terrifying drop of the canyon as the sunset bled across the overwhelming void. The critical line remains empty, holding the weight of everything that hasn't happened yet. Justice abandoned the weight of proof. Now, only the violent tilt of the empty pan testifies to its profound imbalance. The front page is a crumpled testament to failure, detailing the systemic incompetence and negligence that has gripped the system. There was no name on the door, only a blindingly polished anonymity reflecting the cold institutional light. The crisp photograph remained, but the executive himself was dissolving, a phantom identity haunting the career he no longer held. A gloved hand swiftly extracted the evidence, ensuring nothing remained to contradict the narrative. The surgical scar on the plastic binding just past page 214 confirms the breach. Someone expertly compromised this report. The careful examination revealed the slight distortion, undeniable proof that the coil had been manually tampered with. The truth was truncated, and the researcher's tense grip became a white-knuckled statement of rage against the finality of the cover. The disaster is evident. The truth of the response is sealed off behind an industrial, impenetrable haze. Finally, we turn to a document of high sensitivity involving delicate international relations during a period of intense global friction. The diplomatic backchannel summary, designated Operation Cerberus. These documents concern secret communications conducted outside standard diplomatic lines, often involving unofficial envoys, intermediaries, or non-state actors. Designed to de-escalate crisis or establish clandestine understandings. This folder is distinct in its materiality.
The original documents were copied onto tissue-thin onion skin paper, designed for easy disposal or concealment.
They are brittle and fragile, bundled together with a specific type of thin, archival cotton string, tied with a precise knot that speaks to institutional routine. The surrounding context suggests the documents relate to negotiations during a military standoff involving a volatile third party, where public diplomatic recognition was impossible, but private guarantees were crucial. The surviving document provides a detailed overview of the diplomatic actions taken by the receiving nation. It includes summaries of meetings, internal assessments of the negotiating environment, and strategic planning based on perceived intentions. The narrative is taut, precise, and heavily focused on the geopolitical implications of the communications. However, the core data is absent. The back channel is defined by the actual transcripts or high-fidelity summaries of the communications themselves. The document repeatedly refers to the principal's message of July 14th and the transcript Annex G, which provided the direct input that shaped the strategy documented in the summary. The document skips numerous internal annexes, but one sequence is particularly crucial. After establishing the strategic goal on page 68, the text skips directly to page 119, the beginning of the internal reaction summary. Missing are over 50 pages, which should have contained the transcribed communications, the raw dialogue between the back-channel negotiators. The analysis is left with a set of observed reactions, the implementation of specific diplomatic actions, the subtle shifting of military assets, and the modification of public statements, but without the originating stimulus. Why did the government move their assets? What specific promise was made, or what threat was issued? That triggered the highly sensitive response detailed in the second half of the report? The missing raw transcripts deny historians the direct voice of the diplomatic actors. Was the rhetoric used in the back channel far more aggressive or far more yielding than the public narrative allowed? Did the negotiations reveal knowledge of vulnerabilities that the government is still unwilling to expose? The physical removal of these specific pages, the contextual bridge between threat perception and strategic execution, leaves the subsequent diplomatic history utterly detached from its true genesis. The thin paper stock, easily separated, now serves as a reminder of how easily context can be peeled away, leaving only the sterilized, safe summary behind. In all 5 instances, the pattern is consistent. The physical absence of pages does far more than simply hide specific facts. It undermines the ability of the public and historians to establish causality, judgment, and accountability. A redacted line confirms that something was said. A missing annex confirms that something was spent. A missing sequence confirms that something was done. But the physical void guarantees that the precise nature of that expenditure, statement, or action remains an open-ended question. The act of removing these pages is a profound historical statement. It indicates a governmental judgment that the information contained within was not just sensitive, but fundamentally damaging to institutional stability, legal precedent, or operational capacity, even decades after the fact. It suggests that the revelation of the process, how decisions were reached, how money was spent, or who was ultimately protected, poses a greater threat than the revelation of the decision itself. The quiet, hermetically sealed atmosphere of the archive seems to amplify these historical silences. When a researcher turns a page and finds a jump in numbering, the resulting cognitive dissonance is immediate and powerful. It is a moment where the controlled, preserved past encounters the persistent, deliberate obfuscation of the present. The surviving text often works in concert with the void, providing just enough information to define the shape of the missing context. Like tracing the outline of a shadow. To study these incomplete declassified documents is to engage in a form of forensic history. It requires analyzing the paper residue, the binding mechanism, the chronological flow, and the content of the surrounding pages to deduce the nature of the excision. The historian must, in essence, write the missing pages based on the reaction they provoked. The Cold War strategy document, Missing the Assessment of Future Intent, forces the researcher to infer the intentions of a rival power based on the response taken. The Technological Procurement Dossier, Missing its Financial Annexes, compels the researcher to confront the issue of budgetary transparency and potential corruption in the absence of evidence. The Surveillance Protocol Manual, Missing the Operational Deployment Guidelines, necessitates a permanent speculation about the true boundaries of governmental monitoring. The Crisis Review, truncated mid-recommendation, creates an enduring crisis of faith in accountability. And the Diplomatic Summary, lacking the raw transcripts, ensures that the motivations behind high-stakes international maneuvers remain forever shrouded in conjecture. These physical voids, these bureaucratic ghosts clinging to the edges of the preserved binding threads, do not merely represent lost information.
They represent the continuing battle for historical narrative, demonstrating how the instruments of government secrecy continue to define and confine public understanding.
Long after the supposed promise of transparency has been made, the silence left behind by the removed pages, in the end, one of the most eloquent and enduring forms of classified information.